What's going on, everybody? Blazing here. Welcome back to the channel, and it's time to talk about nerfs to the Wixwell Yanica comp, the Trunda comp, and the buffs to Hydra. I watched the video. I actually watched it a couple of times. I had some time to kind of watch the other content creators and see what their point of views were, and maybe I was wrong about some things or whatnot, but I feel like 100% this update is going the wrong way. Now, I know you're probably expecting the F-bombs to come in and out. I've had some time to just kind of relax and, you know, try not to be as toxic, but I am going to be very critical of what's going on. So with that said, let's go through, I'm not going to watch the video. I'm just going to go through the infographic cards that they gave us. So the first part where we have the turn limit counter. Now, this one I actually feel is a little bit good. The problem you're going to have is early game players or players that are just entering Hydra, they're not going to be able to do enough damage, right? Those are the players that were just barely getting that one key on brutal or hard or normal. This is really going to affect them. I feel the better way to have done this is to make sure that the damage is only counted up to the first 1,000 turns and then let the keys go on later. I mean, most of us, once it got up to the 1,000 turns, we get out of Hydra and get out of dodge, but now this really handicaps a lot of the players that were kind of in that boat. So while this was a good implementation, I feel like there's some wiggle room to fix this, right? All right, so this is the one right here that I'm most pissed about, is the taunt buff is being nerfed to the ground, right? 100% nerfed to the ground. The devourer, or whoever is being devoured, the marker Hydra is basically going to happen regardless. Champions like Emic, champions like Packmaster, anybody who had a taunt that you were trying to kind of use and abuse, well, I'm not going to say abuse, but that you were trying to use, right? This kind of kills those teams. And one in particular, which was, I believe, was Emic, Painkeeper, and I think it was Artak, maybe a Man-Eater or something, that pretty much helped you get to that one key. Wasn't a huge damage, was doing like 40-50 million damage, but just enough for you to get into Nightmare Hydra and get those rewards. That's kind of big. The fact that they killed this team, again, this hurts the earlier game players, those players that are just trying to progress their accounts, and this was bad. Myself included, I run a double Emic team, which is what I usually showcase, the, you know, who does more damage, and it's still going to work for me because of the team setup that I have. I can still use the damage reduction, not the damage reduction, but the cooldown reduction, but the taunt itself is not going to work. I feel like there's other ways they could have done it. They could have, you know, instead of having a particular champion, you know, you could have just had whoever has the taunt just be the one that gets devoured. I feel like that would have been a little bit better, especially because as we go further on with this next part, it made a little more sense to not always have your nukers devoured. That said, let's talk about this next part where now every time your champions get devoured, the damage that you're going to need to put in is going to be a lot higher. Now, this is, again, going to hurt the early game players, the players that are just entering in. End game players are going to be able to do enough damage. They're going to be able probably to just, you know, hit one head with like 50%, and it's not going to be too bad for them. Again, the earlier players, though, are going to have a problem. Now, this doesn't start coming into turn counter too. So as the Hydra head comes down from like a 5, I think it's 5 or 4 turns, right? When it gets down to 2 turns devour, so as you know, after your first 3 or 4 devours, you're going to start getting more damage that you're going to need to free your champions. So with the 5th one, it's a little bit extra. The 2nd one, it's the extra HP granted plus 2% bonus HP depending on the difficulty, and then 3% bonus on the 7th one. The bonus HP received will continue to increase on the Devourer until the Hydra fight ends. So essentially, you could get up to over 50% or almost 100%, right, of a Hydra head that you need to do the damage on. Not needed. Not really needed. I get where they were trying to go. They wanted to make it a little more difficult. They wanted to make sure. But I feel like, you know, if you get the taunt on the wrong person, if you can't put enough damage out because the poison cloud has put its, or the poison head is put its poison cloud, you're kind of screwed, right? So this really was not needed to be done. I feel like this whole thing, just scrap it, throw it back out, get it done. Don't even implement it. The decapitation now is actually going to be a problem. So before we were able to bring decreased speed on a decapitated head, you were able to kind of, I guess, cheese it with the head of decay, or the head of mischief, sorry. If you kind of killed it at the right time, you were able to reset the turn meter. But now they're gonna have an HP pool. And once that HP pool is gone because you did some damage to it, your head is going to respawn. This gives a huge nerf to everybody's damage, again affecting the early game players, or the players that are trying to progress, more than the end game pay to win whales. They're not really going to see this. Basically for them, all of what's going on is going to be like, well, I'm just going to try to make my team a little bit better, and it is what it is. Run my team. The next part with the Serpent's Will buff. Now this one I actually kind of like, because yes, while it does mitigate the damage 100% of the time when Serpent's Will buff is active, we can actually only have one Serpent's Will buff active per time. So that means if two heads pop out, only one of them is going to get it. Unfortunately, you can't control which one it is. But on the off chance, let's say you kill a head, then you take a turn, and then another head respawns, it's still only one head that has the Serpent's Will. So the second head coming in isn't really going to have that Serpent's Will buff, so you could still start doing some damage on it. I think overall, I kind of like this one, because before, when I would have two heads or sometimes three heads, it kind of sucked losing my damage, especially when I was trying to do full auto. And also, I saw in the video where they said, well, don't worry, guys. Devoured champions are always going to be prioritized to try to release them. That should have been in day one, Plarium. Should have been in day one. Don't do all this shit and then say, oh, by the way, we're adding this, which is already currently in game, to just kind of say, well, it's not that bad. No, it's still bad. Again, this I feel like I'm 50-50 on. The decapitation completely sucks. The Serpent's Will, I like. I'm on board with that. So let's talk about Wixwell and Yanica comps, right? Shield comps are now nerfed to the ground. Even though it's not going to be effective or affected in Clan Boss, it is going to be affected in Hydra. Basically, every shield you have, so if you have a Krisk that has a shield, and then you put on a shield set, like a divine shield set, because it's considered separate, or a shield set, you can grow each one of those to 1 million. So combined you'll have 2 million, separate you'll have 1 million. It, again, basically works okay for Clan Boss, because Clan Boss isn't going to do 1 million damage per turn. But Hydra, you're not going to be able to do much, right? Because if Yanica steals, she does 15% of the damage for the shield stolen. So she's only going to do 150,000 damage, which is not useful. You have other champions with their A1 that are going to hit harder than that. So this was actually nerfed to the ground. Should it have been nerfed to the ground? I don't think so. I think nerfing this to the ground was a bad idea, because now people that were able to get that 1.2 billion damage because of this comp, or, you know, kind of give their clans something to do, are now kind of SOL'd, right? And you don't know if they're going to be able to run a different comp. So unfortunately, I feel this was a harsh nerf. Maybe rebalance Yanica and have her do like 75% or 50%. That way at least they can get some damage done. But 15% for Yanica is not really good. I feel like you need to kind of go back to the drawing board with this Plarium. It's definitely not something I would support. Let's talk about Trunda's nerf. Now this was way too harsh. Now I know some people said, well, buff other champions that are going to be able to do the same damage to Trunda to make it more level. I don't think that was the answer. I feel this was a very harsh nerf. I think, like, yeah, you should bring it down, but not to the point where you go from billions to millions. I feel like if they had done this to where, you know, a Yanica Wixwell composition or an Emic and not Emic, Aislinn and Ironclad composition kind of damage we're doing, I feel like putting this in at the same time would have been fine, because it gives people different choices, right, to do damage. But what they did here is now on the A1, each hit has a 50% chance of placing a stun. Before, it was on the second hit, you could place a stun. So, I mean, polymorph in arena is really going to be a thing. On the A2, which was her money hitting ability, right, it used to be attacks one enemy, then attacks all other enemies with a second hit, dealing 60% of the damage inflicted from the first one. Basically, the way this worked is it would take the damage. If it was a crit hit, then it would be a double crit hit on the other heads. What they've done now is attacks one enemy, then attacks all other enemies with the second hit, dealing 60% of the damage inflicted from the first hit and ignoring 50% of the target's defense, which is pretty good, right? Ignoring defense is always a solid thing, especially if you have like the area bonuses for your Great Hall. Between that and this, that's 70%. Helm Smasher along with Savage, you're almost ignoring 100% defense, and you don't need to bring a decreased defense in, right? It's just a lot more consistent, which I guess then can just translate into doing different things with the champions or different compositions. On the second hit, the skill ignores 50% of the target's defense. This hit can always is always going to be normal. It will never crit, right? So that's where they change this ability. I feel like it's good, but it just a little harsh. Like, it's still just give the surplus damage, right? Or fix the surplus damage to it. I don't know. I feel like there had to been a different way to nerf her or rebalance her without pretty much making that comp all the way to the ground. Her A3 attacks all enemies, has a 75% or 70% chance of placing a stun for one turn, also places an HP burn debuff for 2 turns. So this is kind of making her better for Stone Skin and for Hydra. That way you could still get some HP burn out. Places an extra hit on enemies not under stun debuffs, gives you basically a little more damage on Hydra. Both hits both hits of the skill deal 50% more damage to targets under Stone Skin. That is a complete arena ability. The problem with this is, even if you landed the HP burn, unless you have like cracking roots with like a 6-star, and even then it might not be good enough to actually do enough damage to kill the Stone Skin. At this point, you know, especially if you're going into like a UDK, you're gonna normal hit that shit. So he's gonna counter her pretty easily, right? And then on her passive, now we get her attack stacks up by 10% for each stun or HP burn, stacks up to 50%. So she gets like a built-in increase attack. And then we'll do the same thing for her speed, basically 15 extra speed. Not bad. That part I would leave alone. The first part I'd leave alone. The third part, her A3 is good. I just think the A2 was just kind of nerfed to the ground. I feel like maybe, I don't know, changing the multiplier for the second hit or something would have been better. But you literally nerfed the comp to the ground. You nerfed her to the ground, and you're trying to make up for it by saying, well, she could be useful in arena. Well, guys, like I said, I think some of the things were good in the patch. Some things are bad. Now, this is going to go active next week before next week's Hydra Clash. So after this one finished. So if you're running a Trunda comp, get it out of your system now. It's not going to help you out anymore. You know, what does this mean for Hydra in the long run? The Hydra is pretty much going to be dead content for a lot of the early game accounts. You're going to suffer trying to get harder, right? So people that were trying to get from brutal to nightmare, they're going to go, it feels like, back to brutal, and their damage, you know, it's going to be that much harder. Now, if you were already doing, you know, 200-300 million damage, your damage is probably going to be cut down, I want to say about 50%, because you're going to lose a lot of time that you can't hit the heads while they're decapitated. So while the scores may kind of normalize out and you really aren't going to see these crazy numbers of like billions and billions of damage, is it good to kind of go back and reset that damage calculation, right? No. You know, I kind of get giddy when I see my champions hit harder. I like to, you know, doing 1 billion damage or 2 billion damage on a key is not a bad thing. Like, the higher the number, the people get excited, you know, they want to interact with the game mode. So I feel like, again, this is going to be really hard for a lot of the early players, the ones that are trying to especially kind of move on. They're going to go back a step. Endgame players, you're going to see your damage dramatically, you know, come down 50%, 40% at least, and that's going to be a problem. Overall, Hydra for people, I feel like a lot of people I'm seeing in the comments are just going to say, I'm going to skip it. I'm not going to do it. It's not needed. That said, guys, we'll be discussing this a lot more on the Knights of Flurry podcast, which is on Sunday, 2 p.m. EST. Make sure you guys join us. There's going to be a lot more to, you know, kind of deep dive into. There's definitely a lot of questions you have. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments down below. I will ask. I will try to get whatever information I can out of Plarium, or at least the YouTube community managers. And we'll definitely, again, discuss it on the podcast, 2 p.m. EST on Sunday. And as always, guys, much love, much appreciation. Be safe, be well, be good to each other. I'll catch you guys next time.